It began as many slow stories do, with a quiet river and a small town that did not know it would become famous for waiting. The river was called the Go Water, a lazy, winding stretch of greenish water in the northeast countryside. On its banks sat the town of Brennan-Go, where cobbled streets dipped into muddy edges, and the air often smelled faintly of wet leaves and bread baking. In the year 1721, the people of Brenton had one problem. There was no easy way to cross the river. The far bank was home to fertile farmland, a small forest, and a road that led to the bigger markets. But to reach it, you needed a ferry, slow, creaky, and run by a man named Albert Prynne, who was already 68 and had a habit of stopping halfway across to chat with passengers about the weather. The town council decided a bridge was needed. It would, they said, secure our prosperity for generations. That phrase, as history later proved, was almost accidentally correct. The first design was simple, a wooden span with stone piers. Funds were promised by the county governor, and workers began piling stones on the riverbank in the spring of 1722. But the river flooded that April, washing away weeks of work. The council paused the project until the waters recede. They didn't know it then, but pause would become the town's most used construction term for the next 2 centuries. By 1723, the riverbank still held only a half-built stone pier and a pile of unused timber. The townspeople joked, softly, so the council wouldn't hear, that the bridge was already a landmark, not for its beauty, but for how little it had changed. The delay was blamed on many things. Some said it was the floodwaters, which had left the ground too soft to hold the weight of stone. Others whispered it was the county treasurer, who had redirected the funds to repair his own estate roof. By the spring of 1724, work began again, but with fewer men. The younger laborers had gone to nearby towns where wages were steadier, and those who remained worked slowly, knowing the pay was uncertain. A mason named Thomas Kettler kept a small journal of the project. In one entry, dated May 3rd, 1724, he wrote, "We set 3 stones today. The foreman says the bridge will stand for centuries. I believe him, for at this rate, it will take centuries to build." It became the town's quiet joke, passed from father to son, that the bridge would be finished only when everyone who started it was long in the ground. By 1730, the bridge had become less a construction site and more of a monument to stillness. The half-built stone pier stood in the middle of the river, like a tooth jutting from dark water, moss growing along its base. On misty mornings, it looked almost ghostly. The men who had first lifted stones were now older, slower, some bent from years of other work. Albert Prynne, the old ferryman, still rowed his boat back and forth. He would glance at the pier with a mixture of pride and pity, as if greeting an old friend who could never quite get on his feet. A new council meeting in 1731 promised to restart the work. Fresh funds were approved. A new foreman, a brisk man named Hugh Maloran, was brought in from the city. He arrived with energy and promises, speaking of a wooden span that would be faster and cheaper than stone, but would, unlike stone, was scarce in Brenton. What little timber they found had to be hauled from far-off forests at great expense. Maloran left the job after a year, citing financial disagreements. The bridge remained exactly as it was, a pier without a path. By 1740, the townspeople had grown used to it. Children learned to skip stones from its shadow. Fishermen tied boats to it, as if it had been built for that purpose. And the council minutes, yellowing with age, recorded fewer and fewer mentions of the bridge project. It was still there, but so was the river. And the river had all the time in the world. By 1765, Brennan-Go had changed. The cobblestone streets were busier. The market smelled of roasted chestnuts in winter and fresh apples in autumn, and a few taller brick houses had appeared near the town square. But the river looked the same, and in its middle, the lone stone pier still waited, patient as ever. The old ferryman, Albert Prynne, had passed on, and his son, Matthew, now ran the ferry. Matthew rowed faster but charged more, and he often told passengers that the bridge would never be built. Not in his lifetime. That same year, a wealthy merchant named Elias Darrington moved to town. Elias had seen bridges in the great cities, arches of stone that seemed to leap across water. and he was determined to give Brenton the same. He petitioned the council, offered to fund part of the project himself, and even brought in a new architect from the capital. The plan was ambitious. 2 grand stone arches with carved balustrades, wide enough for carts and carriages. The townspeople were excited again. Shopkeepers even spoke of more trade coming from across the river. Construction began in 1767. For 2 years, there was real progress. Scaffolding, fresh stonework, the sound of hammers ringing over the water. But in 1769, a bitter winter froze the river solid. The weight of ice pushed against a half-built structure, cracking one of the new arches. Repairs drained funds, tempers flared, and Elias himself left for London, never to return. By the spring of 1771, the work had stopped once more. The bridge now had one lonely arch rising beside the original pier. 2 fragments of ambition, separated by flowing water. Some in town began to say the river didn't want a bridge at all. And perhaps, they whispered, it was best not to argue with the river. By 1805, the bridge was no longer just an unfinished structure. It was a family story. Grandfathers told their grandchildren about the year the river flooded, the winter the arch cracked, the merchant who promised the world and vanished. Matthew Prynne, the ferryman, had grown gray. His son Samuel now helped row the ferry, their oars dipping into the same water Albert had crossed almost a century earlier. Every trip past the pier and the lone arch was a reminder that nothing and everything had changed. In the tavern, travelers would sometimes ask, "When will the bridge be finished?" The locals would smile politely. Some would say, "Next year." Others would chuckle and say, "Ask again in 100 years." A few ambitious voices still rose from time to time. In 1810, a young councilman named Peter Collingford proposed using new iron construction techniques to finally connect the 2 sides. He gave long speeches about progress, trade, and pride. But Brenton was no longer a thriving hub. Trade routes had shifted. Larger towns with working bridges had taken most of the commerce. For many, the ferry was good enough, and spending precious funds on a bridge felt like throwing silver into the river. By 1820, Peter had left for a larger city, his dream left behind like so many others. The unfinished bridge pieces, 1 pier, 1 arch, became favorite purchase for herons in summer and for ice in winter. And so, year after year, the river flowed between them, carrying away seasons, faces, and the memory of when the bridge was supposed to be built at all. By 1860, the world beyond Brenton-on-Go had transformed. Steam engines hissed to the countryside. Iron rails stretched like dark ribbons across the land, and newspapers carried stories of cities building bridges in months, not centuries. Brenton, however, still had its pier and its arch, 2 weathered relics of old ambitions. The ferry, now run by Samuel Prynne's son Edward, still crossed the Goldwater every day, its wooden hull creaking with age. That year, a railway surveyor named Charles Whitcomb visited town. He looked at the half-built bridge and saw not failure, but opportunity. Iron, he said, could span the river faster than stone ever could. A light but strong lattice structure could be built in a year, maybe less. The council was hesitant. Brenton had been disappointed too many times. But Charles was persuasive. He brought drawings, costs, and a promise. If the iron bridge is not finished within 18 months, I'll pay the difference myself. Work began in the spring of 1861. Barges carried iron beams upriver, and for the first time in living memory, the sounds of hammers and rivets echoed over the water. The townspeople gathered at the bank to watch, whispering that perhaps the curse, if there was one, was finally lifting. But the world beyond the Goldwater had other plans. In 1862, political unrest in the region drew funds and laborers away. Iron prices rose sharply. By autumn, construction slowed to a crawl. The half-assembled iron truss stood awkwardly beside the old stonework, like 2 centuries shaking hands without knowing what to say. By the spring of 1863, the work stopped entirely. Charles Whitcomb left his promise unkept, and Brenton once again had a new chapter in his long story of almost building a bridge. By 1900, Brenton-on-Go was a quieter place than it had been in its merchant days. The railway had bypassed it. The market square was smaller, and more of the younger generation left for the cities and stayed. The old bridge remains, stone pier, single arch, half-iron frame, had become something of a local landmark. Artists painted it, photographers captured it, and the townsfolk told its story to visitors with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. In 1905, the council once again discussed the bridge. The new mayor, Harold Fenwick, believed the time had come to finish it. Motor cars were beginning to appear, and he argued that a proper crossing could bring back some trade and perhaps even tourists. A design competition was held. Plans arrived from London, Paris, and even as far as New York. The winning design was modest. 2 steel spans resting on the original stone pier, connecting to a reinforced approach from each bank. Work began in 1907. This time, progress was real. Steel girders rose into place. Riveters worked day and night, and the skeleton of the bridge stretched further than it ever had before. The townspeople dared to believe. Then came the winter of 1908. A sudden thaw followed by heavy rain sent torrents of ice-filled water downstream. One night, the river roared higher than anyone had seen in decades. In the morning, part of the new steelwork lay twisted and half submerged, the current tugging at it like a stubborn weed. Repairs would be costly, too costly for a small town with shrinking funds. By 1910, the site was silent again. Another generation's hopes washed downstream. Some began to say, only half joking, that the bridge was never meant to be finished, that it was Brenton's fate to have a crossing that always stopped in the middle. By 1946, the war had ended, but its marks were everywhere. Brenton-on-Gull had lost many of its young men, and the old ferry, still run by the Prynne family, was now patched with more metal plates than wood. The bridge ruins had changed again. The single stone pier was cracked but still solid. The lone arch leaned a little more toward the water. The rusting iron frame from the 1860s stood, like a strange skeleton, casting thin shadows on the river.